In the bustling streets of downtown Chicago, where the morning rush creates a symphony of footsteps and hurried conversations, a simple act of kindness became the catalyst for an unexpected story that would challenge our perceptions and remind us about the power of humility. It was a crisp autumn morning, and the glass doors of the Preston Medical Center gleamed in the early sunlight. A middle-aged black man in a well-pressed navy suit noticed a woman struggling with several files in her coffee cup as she approached the entrance. Without hesitation, he stepped forward, offering a warm smile as he held the door open for her. His small gesture, something his mother had taught him since childhood, was met with an unexpected response that would leave witnesses stunned. The woman, dressed in an expensive white pantsuit, stopped abruptly, her face contorted with disdain as she looked him up and down. "I don't need your help," she snapped, her voice dripping with contempt. "I know what you people are like, always looking for a way to get close." Her words cut through the morning air like ice, causing several passers-by to stop and stare. The man's smile never wavered, though something flickered behind his eyes, not anger, but a deep sadness that spoke of similar encounters before. He simply nodded and said, "Have a blessed day, ma'am," before continuing his way into the building, his dignity intact despite the unnecessary confrontation. What the woman didn't know, what she couldn't have known through the lens of her prejudice, was that this man had spent the last 20 years serving their community in ways she couldn't imagine. But life has a peculiar way of teaching us lessons when we least expect them, and sometimes our biggest moments of growth come from our most shameful encounters. Just 3 days later, fate would orchestrate a meeting that would shake the foundation of this woman's worldview. The same medical center would become the stage for their second encounter, but under dramatically different circumstances. This time, the power dynamic would shift in a way that neither of them could have anticipated. As she rushed through those same glass doors, clutching her side in pain, she would find herself face to face with the very man she had humiliated. Only now, he wouldn't be holding the door. He would be wearing a white coat, with a stethoscope around his neck and a name tag that revealed his true identity in the building. The look of recognition that crossed her face in that moment would spark a chain of events that would not only challenge her prejudices, but also inspire thousands of others who would later hear their story. Sometimes, the most powerful lessons about kindness, prejudice, and redemption come from these unexpected moments that force us to confront our own biases. What happened next in that hospital corridor would become a testament to the human capacity for both grace and growth. It would show how a single moment of humility can bridge gaps that prejudice creates, and how sometimes the very people we judge most harshly become the ones who teach us our most valuable life lessons. As the woman stood there, frozen in the moment of recognition, she had no idea that this encounter would change not only her life, but also touch the hearts of countless others who would learn about what transpired in the minutes that followed. Sometimes, the universe has a way of putting us exactly where we need to be, even if it's in a position to face our own mistakes head-on. But what happened next in that hospital corridor? Well, that's where our story truly begins to unfold. The tension in that hospital corridor was thick enough to cut with a scalpel. Time seemed to freeze as the woman's eyes darted from the doctor's face to his name tag and back again. Dr. Richard Thompson, Chief of Emergency Medicine. The words on his badge might as well have been written in neon lights. Her hand remained pressed against her side, but now she seemed to have forgotten about her pain entirely. Several nurses and hospital staff who had witnessed the incident days before stopped what they were doing, watching the scene unfold. They had seen how gracefully Dr. Thompson had handled the woman's prejudiced outburst that morning, and many had later expressed their admiration for his composure. Some had even wanted to confront the woman, but he had gently discouraged them, saying, "Anger only feeds anger." Kindness is what changes hearts. Now, as Dr. Thompson approached her, his steps were measured and professional. The same warm smile he had offered days ago returned to his face, showing no trace of resentment or satisfaction at her obvious discomfort. "I understand you're in pain," he said, his voice carrying the same gentleness it held when he had wished her a blessed day. "Let's get you taken care of." The woman's face flushed red with embarrassment, and tears welled up in her eyes. She opened her mouth to speak, but the pain in her side suddenly intensified, causing her to double over. Without hesitation, Dr. Thompson called for a wheelchair and helped her into it, his action swift and caring despite their history. As they wheeled her toward the examination room, the woman's shoulders shook with silent sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than physical pain. The other patients in the waiting room watched curiously, unaware of the powerful moment of human connection unfolding before them. Inside the examination room, as Dr. Thompson began his assessment, the woman finally found her voice. "I don't deserve your kindness," she whispered, her words barely audible. Her hands trembled as she wiped tears from her cheeks, smearing her carefully applied makeup. Dr. Thompson paused his examination and looked at her with understanding eyes. "Everyone deserves kindness," he replied simply. "It's not about deserving. It's about being human." He continued his examination, explaining each step with patience and professionalism. As he worked, the woman learned that Dr. Thompson had been at Preston Medical Center for over 2 decades. He had started the hospital's free clinic program, which served thousands of underprivileged families each year. The same hands she had rejected at the door had saved countless lives in this very building. The initial tests revealed that she was suffering from acute appendicitis and would need emergency surgery. As the nurses prepared her for the procedure, she grabbed Dr. Thompson's hand. The words seemed to catch in her throat, but her eyes spoke volumes of regret and revelation. But just as she was about to speak, her condition suddenly took an unexpected turn. The monitors began beeping urgently, and Dr. Thompson's expression shifted from gentle compassion to focused determination. The medical team sprang into action, and in the chaos of the moment, whatever she had wanted to say remained unspoken. As they rushed her toward the operating room, Dr. Thompson walking briskly alongside the gurney, nobody could have predicted how the next few hours would unfold, or how this emergency would become a turning point in both their lives. The story that would emerge from that operating room would challenge not just one person's prejudices, but would spark a conversation that would ripple through their entire community. The operating room buzzed with focused energy as Dr. Thompson and his surgical team worked against time. What had started as a seemingly routine appendectomy had become complicated when they discovered internal bleeding from a previously undetected condition. Every second counted, and the tension in the room was palpable as monitors beeped steadily in the background. As Dr. Thompson worked with precise, skilled movements, his mind briefly flashed back to a similar case he had handled 15 years ago, one that had inspired him to develop a new surgical technique now used in hospitals across the country. That same technique could save this woman's life today, though she had no idea that the man she had judged so harshly was now using his years of expertise to fight for her survival. Outside in the waiting room, her husband had arrived, visibly distraught. One of the nurses who had witnessed the door incident days ago found herself sitting next to him, offering comfort and coffee. As they talked, she learned that his wife had been acting strangely the past few days, unusually quiet and withdrawn, spending hours looking at old family photos and crying. What the nurse didn't know was that those tears had been triggered by memories of the woman's grandmother, a woman who had worked as a housekeeper for a wealthy white family in the 1960s. Her grandmother had told stories of kindness that transcended racial barriers, stories that had somehow gotten lost in the shuffle of modern life until that moment at the hospital door brought them rushing back. Back in the operating room, complications continued to arise. Dr. Thompson remained steady, his calm voice guiding his team through each challenge. But even with all his experience, this case was pushing his skills to their limits. The next few minutes would be crucial, and he knew that the decisions he made in this high-pressure moment would determine not just the patient's survival, but potentially reshape multiple lives. 3 hours into the surgery, a critical moment arrived. The bleeding had intensified, and Dr. Thompson faced a decision that required both medical expertise and split-second judgment. The entire operating room fell silent as he paused for just a moment, his mind racing through years of experience and knowledge. In that moment of intense concentration, a memory flashed through his mind. His own mother's voice from years ago, telling him, "Baby, sometimes people's hearts are harder than stone, but even stones can be shaped by gentle streams of kindness." Those words had guided him through countless difficult situations, including that morning at the door. Just then, the patient's vital signs began to fluctuate dangerously. The anesthesiologist called out urgent readings as the surgical team tensed, ready to respond to their chief's commands. Dr. Thompson knew he had seconds to act, and his next moves would need to be perfect. The operating room clock ticked loudly as Dr. Thompson prepared to implement a risky but potentially life-saving technique he had helped pioneer. The same hands that had reached out to hold the door now held this woman's life in their skilled grasp. The next few minutes would not only determine her survival, but would set the stage for a profound transformation that neither of them could have anticipated. As the tension in the operating room reached its peak, no one could have predicted how the next few moments would unfold or how this medical emergency would become a powerful story of redemption, forgiveness, and the triumph of human spirit over prejudice. The events that were about to unfold in that operating room would leave an indelible mark on everyone present. In that critical moment, as Dr. Thompson began implementing his specialized surgical technique, the hospital's backup generators suddenly hummed to life. The main power had failed, casting the operating room in the eerie blue glow of emergency lighting. The medical equipment reset itself, beeping urgently as it switched power sources. Every member of the surgical team held their breath, knowing that even a few seconds of disruption could be devastating. But Dr. Thompson's steady hands never wavered. Years of humanitarian work in underdeveloped countries had taught him how to perform under far worse conditions. As the backup system stabilized, he continued his precise movements, speaking calmly to his team. "Stay focused. We've trained for this." The patient's life hung by a thread, but something extraordinary was happening beneath the surface of this intense medical drama. Unknown to everyone in the operating room, the woman's husband had made a stunning discovery while anxiously waiting outside. While scrolling through old photos on his phone to distract himself, he had found something that would add another layer to this unfolding story. In a 20-year-old newspaper clipping he had saved, there was a photo of a young Dr. Thompson receiving an award for saving a bus full of children during a terrible storm, and among those children was his wife's younger sister. Inside the operating room, the situation continued to intensify. The procedure Dr. Thompson was attempting had only been successfully performed a handful of times worldwide. Each movement required perfect precision. Each decision could mean the difference between life and death. The surgical team watched in awe as he navigated complications that would have overwhelmed lesser surgeons. Suddenly, the patient's blood pressure began to drop dramatically. The anesthesiologist called out the declining numbers as nurses rushed to prepare additional medication. But before they could administer it, something unexpected happened. The woman's heart rate stabilized on its own, almost as if responding to an unseen force. Dr. Thompson's innovative technique was working, but they weren't out of the woods yet. Just then, another surgeon burst into the operating room. "Dr. Thompson," he called out urgently, "there's been a massive pileup on the highway. Multiple critical patients are being redirected to our ER. You're the only one who can handle both situations." The weight of this impossible choice fell heavy in the room. Stay with his current patient whose life hung by a thread, or help coordinate the incoming trauma response that could save multiple lives. The tension in the operating room crackled like electricity. Dr. Thompson stood at a crossroads that would test not just his medical skills, but the very principles he lived by. The same woman who had rejected his simple kindness now depended entirely on his expertise and dedication, while outside, more lives hung in the balance. As the monitors continued their urgent chorus, Dr. Thompson made a decision that would challenge everything we think we know about forgiveness, duty, and human connection. His next actions would not only determine multiple lives' outcomes, but would become a powerful testimony to the strength of human character in the face of prejudice and crisis. The clock on the wall ticked forward mercilessly as Dr. Thompson prepared to demonstrate why he was considered one of the finest surgeons in the country. But even his considerable skills would be tested by what was about to happen next, as circumstances would force everyone involved to confront their deepest beliefs about human nature. In that pivotal moment, Dr. Thompson made the kind of decision that defines a person's character. "Dr. Carter," he called to his colleague who had just entered, "coordinate the trauma response. I'll guide you through my priority cases once we're stable here." His voice carried the unwavering certainty of a man who knew exactly where he needed to be. He wouldn't abandon his patient. Not now. Not ever. The next 30 minutes became a testament to human capability under pressure. While continuing the delicate procedure, Dr. Thompson simultaneously directed the emergency response through his headset, guiding his colleagues through complex trauma cases. His ability to remain focused while helping others sparked whispers of amazement among the operating room staff. Just as they entered the final phase of the surgery, the patient's vital signs suddenly spiked. The room froze in anticipation, but then something remarkable happened. The years of Dr. Thompson's innovative research paid off as his technique not only stopped the bleeding, but led to an unprecedented recovery response. The monitor steadied, showing strong vital signs that grew more stable with each passing minute. As they began closing the surgical site, a nurse burst into the operating room with tears in her eyes. "Dr. Thompson," she said, her voice trembling with emotion, "the woman's husband. He showed us the article. You saved his sister-in-law in that bus accident 20 years ago. The patient's sister was one of those children." For the first time that day, Dr. Thompson's hands paused briefly. The universe had drawn a circle none of them could have imagined. The same family whose life he had touched 2 decades ago had crossed his path again, this time under dramatically different circumstances. As they wheeled the patient to recovery, her husband approached Dr. Thompson with tears streaming down his face. But before he could speak, the doctor gently raised his hand. "Your wife is going to be fine," he said with his characteristic warm smile. "She's stronger than she knows." The husband broke down, revealing how his wife had spent the past few days tormented by guilt, trying to find a way to apologize for her behavior. But the story wasn't over yet. As Dr. Thompson turned to leave, exhausted from the marathon surgery, a group of people caught his attention in the waiting room. There stood 5 of the now-grown children from that bus accident 20 years ago, including the patient's sister. They had seen the news about the pile-up and came to help. Nurses, doctors, and first responders themselves now, inspired by the man who had saved their lives. The woman's recovery was remarkably swift, but the healing that happened in her heart was even more profound. 1 week after the surgery, she asked to address the hospital staff. Standing shakily at a podium, she shared her story of transformation. "I came into this hospital carrying a weight much heavier than physical pain," she said, her voice cracking with emotion. "I left carrying something far greater, the knowledge that the very people we sometimes push away might be the ones destined to save us, in more ways than one." As she finished speaking, Dr. Thompson stood quietly at the back of the room, the same gentle smile on his face. But this time, it was he who was surprised when she revealed one final truth. She had established a foundation to fund medical education for underprivileged students, named in honor of the doctor who had not only saved her life, but had helped her find her own humanity again. And so, a story that began with a door being held open ended with countless new doors being opened for others, proving that sometimes the most powerful medicine isn't found in an operating room. It's found in the human heart's capacity to transform and heal itself. The impact of that day rippled through the community like waves in a still pond. In the months that followed, the woman's foundation grew beyond anyone's expectations. Local businesses matched her initial funding, and within a year, 15 promising students from underprivileged backgrounds had received full medical school scholarships. Each of them carried the same dream: to follow in Dr. Thompson's footsteps and prove that kindness could be the most powerful instrument in a doctor's toolkit. But the story's influence reached far beyond the walls of Preston Medical Center. News channels picked up the tale, not for its drama, but for its raw humanity. In a world often divided by prejudice and misunderstanding, this story offered hope that change was possible, one heart at a time. Dr. Thompson's simple act of maintaining his kindness in the face of prejudice had sparked a movement that nobody could have predicted. The woman herself became an unexpected advocate for change. She started visiting schools and community centers, sharing her story with unflinching honesty. "I was raised with certain beliefs," she would tell her audiences, "but it took nearly losing my life to realize that these beliefs were chains holding me back from seeing the true beauty in people's hearts." Dr. Thompson continued his work with the same humble dedication he'd always shown. When asked about the incident, he would simply smile and say, "Every day we have a choice to build walls or bridges. I choose bridges." His response became a motto for the hospital's new diversity and inclusion program, which trained healthcare workers to provide compassionate care to all patients, regardless of their backgrounds. The group of survivors from the bus accident 20 years ago formed a volunteer organization, providing support to emergency room patients and their families. They named it Thompson's Bridge, a tribute to the man who had saved their lives twice, once through his surgical skills and again through his example of unwavering kindness. On the 1-year anniversary of the surgery, the woman organized a special dinner at the hospital. As staff members, scholarship recipients, and community leaders gathered together, she stood up to make a toast. Looking at Dr. Thompson, she said, "Some angels wear white coats instead of wings. They hold doors open even when we try to close them in their faces. They save lives not just through medicine, but through mercy." That evening, Dr. Thompson shared something he'd never told anyone before. His mother, a housekeeper who had raised him alone, had always told him, "Son, in a world that might not always be kind to you, be the kindness you wish to see." As he spoke these words, many in the room wiped away tears, understanding that his actions that day had been the culmination of a lifetime of choosing love over hate. The story continues to be shared, not as a tale of shame or blame, but as a testament to the transformative power of persistent kindness. It reminds us that sometimes our greatest moments of growth come disguised as our most shameful mistakes, and that it's never too late to open the door to change. Today, if you visit Preston Medical Center, you'll see a simple plaque near the entrance. It reads, "Let kindness be your first medicine." Below these words is a small etching of an open door, a subtle reminder that every moment carries the potential for transformation, and that sometimes the simplest acts of kindness can save more than just lives. They can save souls. And so, a story that began with a closed heart and an open door ended by opening countless hearts and doors for others, proving that in the end, love and kindness are the most powerful medicines we possess.